Do feelings produce art, or does art produce feelings? While both are obviously true, that answer does not do justice to the complexity of a relationship that changes in chronology. The great composers begin with an inner idea, which through technique in writing music they express in the form of a notated score, which is recreated in the form of a live performance, which is perceived by a listener. Listeners have their own feelings raised to the level of the great composers, and in the process come to understand their own feelings in a more defined form. Although music is usually associated with the other arts, it is actually unique. The distinction between painting and music, for example, works like this. The painter has an object, say a vase of flowers, from which they develop an inner artistic vision, which through the technique of oils and brushes, they turn into the work of art, a canvas. The composer has no comparable object, but rather begins directly with an inner artistic vision, which through music notation they turn into a score. But this score is not music, and neither is it the artwork. Written music is only symbols that represent the composer's inner idea, which comes into existence in the recreation of the music in a live performance. The challenge for composers is expressing their inner vision in a notational language which has no symbols at all for emotions. The artist begins with an inner idea. Art begins with thought. This is perfectly illustrated in the anecdote of Leonardo da Vinci, who shocked the prior of the Convent of the Graces by standing for days gazing at the Last Supper, without ever touching it with a brush. His response to the prior's questioning was, "The minds of men of lofty genius are most active in invention when they are doing the least external work." So what do we look for in the composer and their composition? How do we find high quality in music? Because in English all music is included under one word, music, some have made the mistaken conclusion that all music is therefore somehow equal. A wide variety of music is available to us which uses the same notational language. But to say this makes all music equal in significance is just as absurd as saying Shakespeare and comic books are equal in significance, because they both use letters of the alphabet. The reason great literature and great musical literature are more significant than less significant works has to do not with the language, although of course Shakespeare and Mozart did use beautiful language, but with what it is that the language represents. One characteristic of the very best music is universality, music which speaks so clearly and compellingly that it is understood on a wide level. In contrast, constructed music, such as that being marketed by educational publishers, is music designed for a certain portion of the educational market, designed for mass sales, and is carefully written to meet the technical needs of that market. But it is certainly not inspired music. It is exactly the kind of music Mendelssohn had in mind when he wrote, "Music composed with a purpose will never reach the heart, because it does not come from the heart." This kind of music has been around for a long time, and for centuries, serious musicians have made the same complaint. Wagner found this lack of inspiration in much of the music of Meyerbeer, who was his much more popular rival in Paris. Technique in composition exists on two levels, the first of which is purely knowledge. This is a highly technical form of knowledge that deals not only with every aspect of how to write music, but also with a whole range of technical information regarding the acoustic and performance considerations upon which music depends. Some of this knowledge is very specialised and absorbed through what we might call the composer's practical experience. Of course, technique has its limits, for in the end, all the technique in the world does not produce beautiful music. And of course, the reverse is true. One may have beautiful ideas, but lacking technique, one's ideas can never be turned into music. But there is a more significant limitation to technique. Technique is a form of knowledge, that is to say, it is rational, it can be taught and learned. Thus, we immediately encounter an aesthetic paradox. Music is the communication of feelings, and feelings are not rational. Therefore, there must be an entirely different definition of technique in composition, and this has to do with the composer's ability to communicate feelings through a symbolic language which has no specific symbols for feeling. Although the score is a vital step, the score is not music. No matter to what degree of detail composers note their ideas on paper, no matter how much time and effort they expend, the score can never be considered as synonymous with their inner musical idea. Firstly, the score is written in a left hemisphere symbolic language. It is being asked to represent the composer's right hemisphere musical idea, which is something it cannot by nature do. The left hemisphere simply does not understand music, save the rational aspects of it which can be notated. Secondly, musical notation is not capable of precision. For example, we have only one way of writing a dotted eighth note followed by a 16th note, while in the actual practice of performance, this figure is played with great variety, under the influences of tempo, articulation, and style. Similarly, dynamic markings are not only incapable of precision, but were never intended to be precise in the first place. The score is, nevertheless, the special step in the chain of the aesthetic experience in music, which makes real music possible. The score is the only way composers can try to transmit their ideas, and it is the only place the performer can look to discover the composer's inner idea. But the problem remains. Musical notation cannot completely notate all there is to music. The performer's goal is to recreate the composer's aesthetic idea. In saying performers should be able to achieve this goal, we cannot say they always do. A performer may perform well, yet distort the composer's intent. Thus, by a poor performance, we mean not only that which is technically deficient, but also that which fails in its obligation to the composer. The highest aesthetic goal in performance begins when the performer comes to understand that not all the music is found on the score page. This is what was meant when Mahler observed, "The important things in music are not found in the notes," and when Bruno Walter commented, "The performer's duty is to recreate the spirit of the score, not the letter of the score." The experience of the listener is the logical end of the aesthetic chain in music. There are two areas of personal development affected when the listener experiences music. First, as with the case of any other kind of intellectual exchange, we profit from the exposure to superior minds. By superior minds, in this case, we mean that the great composer differs with us not so much in kind as in degree. By contemplative listening, the listener is able to place themselves in the perspective of the composer, to experience through their experience. By this process, we are lifted to a higher level of insight. The second area of personal development includes special and unique opportunities for self-discovery. The concentrated, pure form of emotion is communicated through performance. Each listener then takes in this form of the emotion, sifts it through their own experiential understanding of that emotion, and in the process come to understand in a more defined sense this aspect of themselves. It is this experience in music which Aristotle called catharsis. Therefore, in a musical performance, the listener is not an observer at all, but a participant in a live aesthetic experience.